I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse. Today, I'm taking questions from you, the viewers, yes. Then later in the show, filmmaker Oliver Stone joins me to share personal stories from his life and his memoir. It should be great. The world according to Jesse. Welcome to this very special episode. As promised, I'm here to answer questions from the viewers. And I want to thank everyone who participated. Now we're going to have some fun, but first, let me get a rant out of the way. Brigida's not here right now. Naturally, she's on vacation. So that means Jesse Ventura's on the loose. Jesse Ventura's not grounded now, much like Howard Stern and Robin. So we wish Brigida well on vacation, and here we go for my rant. First of all, I want to talk about the coronavirus. This is a war that we're in the middle of. Even our President Donald Trump called it a war. And what makes this war so damn difficult is we're fighting an opponent you can't see. Imagine that. Well, I can imagine it. I did the movie Predator. And in Predator, we couldn't see him. That's what made him so effective and why he could kill us all in the end. We could not see him. Well, this is a war against an opponent we cannot see. Now, the problem is this. When you go to war in the United States of America, we all go to war. All 50 states in unison under one commander-in-chief, the president. What's happened in this war, though, is horrifying. The president has washed his hands of the war, and he's turned it over to 50 governors to take care of it. Now imagine if we fought a regular war that way. Each governor would be the commander-in-chief of his own National Guard troops. You wouldn't have any plan of attack from national, one voice, one leader. No, you'd have 50 leaders around the country, many of them going in different directions. How could you possibly win the war? Now imagine if we did that on a battlefield. Again, if 50 governors were in charge of the battle. A disaster. You have to have one man in charge, Donald Trump, and that's you. When are you going to assume command? You wouldn't go in the military, and yet you call yourself the most patriotic American on the planet. You want your picture up at Mount Rushmore, and yet you won't even lead the war. You pass the buck, Mr. President, and we're not going to win this war until you quit passing the buck, assume command, and lead us in this war, which I think personally you're incapable of doing so. You couldn't even make it one day as a private, more or less be a general and run a war. Okay, there's my rant on the coronavirus. It's not going to be solved until Donald Trump, the president, takes the lead and drives this country in a direction that we can win a war, and we've already lost 6 months. And think of it, over 160,000 casualties of death right now. Vietnam only cost us 58,000. We've almost tripled the death in my war, Vietnam, right now, and we still have a national leader who won't assume command. The world according to Jesse. Okay, now we go to the tweets, and first is Mark. And Mark asks, how would you restore relations with Cuba? Mark, that's a great question. The first thing I would do with Cuba is this: lift the sanctions. Get rid of these sanctions we have against the country of Cuba. We're under some false belief that if we put sanctions on a country, that country will suffer so much that the people will rise up and overthrow their leader, welcome us in, and we can then put our puppet government in there, or the one that we desire to be in there. I got news for you, that don't work. It does not work. I went to Cuba back in 2002. Had the good fortune of going there. I met with Fidel Castro for over an hour, but I got a glimpse of the Cuban people. And the Cuban people are proud people, very, very proud people. They're not going to let us win. In the end, they're never going to let us win. Take that to the bank from me. So the first thing we need to do on Cuba is drop all the embargo, open the country up. Obama started to do it. Now Trump's closed it off again. And let our tourists go there after the pandemic's over with. And that's something, right now Cuba wouldn't want our tourists. They're at zero on the pandemic pretty well. Where are we at? If I were Cubans, I wouldn't want any Americans coming down there. You'll get them all sick. So imagine Cuba does it better than we do, and yet we criticize them. We could take a lesson from Cuba on the pandemic. But that's what you need to do. Drop the embargo immediately, start talks, put an embassy down there, and let's get back to normal with a country that's 90 miles from our border. I don't care if they're socialist or communist. What difference does that make? That's their business, not ours. Now let's go to Brad on the tweet. Obama and Trump both ran on ending our forever wars, yet both escalated our involvement in these disasters. How can we put an end to the wars when politicians use popular ideas to get elected and defy the will of their bases when in office? Well, that's an interesting thing to talk about because first of all, you got to look at it like this. Who are their major contributors? Well, a big major contributor to politics is the military-industrial complex, which means we have to stay at perennial war to keep feeding the machine. You got to keep putting wood in the furnace to keep it burning, and that's the military-industrial complex. So they're involved in that real heavily, and again, politicians all listen to their contributors, not their constituents. It's who gives them the money to get elected. The thing is, you got to remember, they all promise they're not going to go to war, but once they get in office, so many things are done without their knowledge to take them to war. We're involved in wars all the time, and getting out of them is brutal. Okay, Larry tweets, how can we change our foreign policy of never-ending wars to one of peace and getting along with all countries? Well, Larry, you can do that by this, I think. How about bringing our troops home? There's a great book called War is a Racket by two-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner General Smedley Butler, United States Marine. And he said that we should bring our troops home. Think about it. We have like bases in 180 countries throughout the world. That's an empire. That's an empire, people, like the Roman Empire. And the point being is, how many foreign military bases are inside the United States? The answer? None. So why do we have bases all the way around the world, 180 of them or more, I don't even know the number anymore, all over the place, with us occupying them with our weapons of military and all this and that? Would we ever allow another country to put a military base inside the United States? Absolutely not. So there's the hypocrisy of it all. We need to bring our boys home, like Smedley Butler said, put them to guard both our borders, then you don't need a wall, and we will be the safest country in the world, guarded by the United States military on both our northern border and our southern border. Because let's remember, the alleged hijackers of 9/11, they told us, came down from Canada, didn't they? So there you got it. But the big thing is, we need to close our bases, bring our kids home, save us tremendous amount of money, and with that money, maybe we could start training our military and our Navy to go buy those machines that clean up the ocean, and we could start a war on the environment and pollution and really save humanity instead of wars that kill humanity. Susie asks, regarding the economy and pandemic, would giving $2,000 per month to everyone be a more effective way to feed the economy than giving big handouts to corporations and banks that will hoard it? That's a very simplistic way to put it, but you're right. It should go to the regular people, because when you're in a position of government giving checks to people of $400 to $500, I did this in Minnesota with a rebate check because we were overtaxing too much at the time and getting surpluses. Rest assured, when that check comes to the people, they don't put it in bank accounts, they spend it. And in today's pandemic, they have to spend it to survive. So giving money to the regular people is a good idea because they'll spend it, and people forget it's money spent. Spending is what fuels the economy. Spending is the wood that you throw to keep the fire going. So spending is required in an economy. She's absolutely correct. I don't know about the figures and all that, but giving money to regular people will ensure that it gets back into the economy instead of into the bank rolls and into big umbrellas of big time CEOs and all that stuff out there, which seem to profit the most rather than the regular people. Raymond asks, would you support requiring congressmen to vote according to the wishes of the constituents by using some kind of direct voting system? Simple answer, no. No, no, and no. You elect this guy to represent you, he or her, and it's their job to vote on their conscience. I will tell you this. I've served as a mayor and I've served as a governor. And I can assure you, I have never made one decision based upon what do I need to decide to get reelected. Let me repeat that. What position do I need to take to get reelected? If you start walking down that path like President Donald Trump is doing, you're in for a recipe of disaster. You need to make decisions based upon what you think is right or wrong, and not based upon how do I keep my job and how do I please everybody. If you do that, then you are a low-life politician. If you're a statesman, you stand up and you're able to look in the mirror and be comfortable with what may be an unpopular decision now, but down the road could be a very popular one. You have to be able to trust your representative. I know that's difficult because the only thing we have are Republicans and Democrats, and they're very hard to trust. Well, it's time for a break. I'll be back in just a few minutes to sit down with filmmaker and author Oliver Stone. Don't miss this one. The world according to Jesse. It's my pleasure to welcome Oliver Stone, an Oscar-winning director, producer, and screenwriter. He joins me today to discuss his new memoir, Chasing the Light. The world according to Jesse. Oliver, in many ways, your memoir is a coming-of-age story about how you became an Oscar-winning screenwriter and director. It's very personal at times and almost a confessional. What inspired you to share it with the world?
Well, Jesse, I've always been a writer. I wrote a novel when I was 19 years old, which got published in 1997 finally. And that was a confessional novel of a 19-year-old boy. I've always been fascinated, I suppose, by myself, but by the act of writing, because it liberates me. It brings me in touch with myself. It allows me, at this age of my life, I'm about your age, I think, it allows me to look back at all these things that happen so fast. You know, once you get into a role on the movie business, once you become somewhat successful, you make 10 movies in 10 years. It goes by like a train, and you don't appreciate it. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go back and appreciate those moments. It's because it's important to your own life, to your sense of soul, that you have an appreciation for this, for what you did in life. And frankly, it sounds horrible, but well, I'm not going to get into that part, but a lot of people have asked me, how do you get into business? All that's all around the world. How do you do this? But for me, it's always been writing and directing. It's not making movies, writing, directing movies.
You share your early mistakes as a director and how you learned from those mistakes. And from those experiences, what are some takeaways to a beginner learning to take failure as a challenge rather than being fearful of it?
Well, I've had plenty of experience of failure. Uh, I it's on the job training, as we used to say in Vietnam. On the job training, that's where you do it. I made low budget horror film, The Hand and Seizure, and I learned working with actors. I think when you're young, the biggest problem for me was I was shy. It's when you work with actors, you have to find a communication, and you have to open up, and you have to say what you're thinking. In other words, those are your instincts. You're saying, I don't know if that's working. I think we need to think about it this way or that way. You have to learn to open up with the actor and tell him what's on your mind. He will then open up with you and trust you. The more you can trust each other, is the better. That's very important. I also think that rehearsals are important. I learned that from watching Al Pacino work on an early version of Born on the Fourth of July in 1978. We were in a rehearsal hall for 3 straight weeks. Very important rehearsal. You get out the kinks. You talk. You think. You make mistakes. It's good. Also, you know, watching actors is crucial. I mean, they have a very good sense of themselves. Michael Caine, when I worked on The Hand, he told me once, I said to him, Michael, I'd like you to give me more of this. I don't see that look that I'm looking for. And he'd say, when you see the rushes, you will, my boy. And it was like a reminder that I had to look a little more deeply. And he's right. And I saw it in the rushes. So you learn by being criticized too, and you learn from failures. But you have to try unless you go out and make that effort. I know so many directors who are just scared to talk to the actors. They don't want to. They want to treat the actors like high glamorous props in the movie. But they're more than that, and they can be your best ally.
Now, how did your time in Vietnam influence your political views and your work as a filmmaker?
Well, that's a very tough question to answer because my political views did not change for many years. I came back from the war. I don't know about you, Jesse. I came back numb, and I didn't have opinions. I was confused and alienated, and it took me a long time. I worked on Born the Fourth of July, and 8 years later, 10 years later, and working with Kovic and his group of veterans in Long Beach, in California, opened my eyes to a lot of the problems that were going on with post the post-war generation at home. But in terms of my experience, when you're walking in the jungle, you're living with the 6 inches right in front of your face. You have very intense experiences, visceral. So let's say you go there, and I was a boy who lived in my head. I was a writer. I was cerebral, been to school, educated, but I dropped out of school. Then you're there. There's no more screwing around. There's only you and the jungle and the enemy and your fellow soldiers. It's a very intense experience at all times. You don't sleep for a year, or actually 15 months in my case. You really have to be on your toes. And I used that intensity when I went to film school almost 2 years later to look at things through a camera's eye as if I was a soldier again. That is to say, really get deep, go deep into it, because your life is on the line. You are the camera. I don't know if I conveyed that, but that's sort of the impression. So I was a serious film student at that point.
Okay, now let's move forward and let's get beyond your book a little. Your 1991 movie JFK, starring Kevin Costner, questions the government's narrative about the murder of our president. What type of trouble did you get in over that movie, and how could that possibly be 40 years later?
The film JFK, contrary to my expectations, went through the roof. It really made an impact. I never thought the Kennedy killing, which had been kind of forgotten in 1991, kind of brushed aside, would have the major impact still that it did. And boy, it, all everybody had an opinion, everybody, and I heard them all, and I got lambasted certainly by the major media, And but I did have some allies. Some film critics really came out strongly for the film. Uh, and a lot of people knew what I was doing, but a lot of people don't understand. They think movies are literal, and they don't understand the nature of the. It's a drama. It's a dramatic situation. Loose elements into one single unified movie. It led to, as you know, it led to the JFK Act in Congress. They were so pissed off at me. I testified in Congress. They were angry because they were. You could tell they wanted to pass this act to prove to the public that I was. We had a statement in the film about how many records were still concealed up until 2038, I think it was. But the truth was that the act went through Congress, the JFK Act, the Records Act, and they formed the Assassination Records Review Board, which is very important in the history of this thing. That was a review board, not they were not an investigation board, a review board to go through the documents. They were supposed to get a lot more documents, but the government, in the 5 years they had, they were budgeted for. They got only a portion of those documents. A lot of them were still held back, but in the documents they gave, there was a lot of details, information which was gleaned. Among them, by the way, you would recognize this was the famous one that you've heard about, Operation Northwoods, the American military Pentagon effort to destabilize Cuba by with false actions, false military actions, provoking the Cubans, provoking and setting up the Cubans as the bad guys. That was just one. That was one of the more glamorous pieces. But there's a lot of details, and I'm making a documentary now. It's called JFK Destiny Betrayed, and we go for four. It's a 4-hour documentary. It's wonky. I mean, it's got a lot of detail. Jim DiEugenio wrote the script for me. He's a researcher, so he dived down. We go into these documents. We go into everything from who's all the witnesses who had never been questioned, witnesses who saw Oswald, who never saw on the stairs, etc., and all kinds of information on the rifle, the bullets. Uh, the background of Oswald is discussed. It's amazing background. I mean, his ties to the intelligence agencies is deepened. Much more evidence of that. And of course, the Warren Commission. We go into more information about the Warren Commission. You know how Alan Dulles, ever got to be the chief investigator, so to speak, of that commission is is going to be an artifact of history that will be remembered by those who think for themselves.
Well, I'll tell you, Oliver, I can't wait. I can't wait for that movie to come out. I'll be first one in line. And let me just add to you, make sure you talk to Mr. Newman. He's the gentleman you all see in the Zapruder film who's laying down covering up his kids. He was the closest guy to the headshot, and the Warren Commission never even talked to him, didn't even bring him in. The closest living witness to the headshot. It was remarkable when I did that on conspiracy theory. Now, your movies offer an alternative point of view. While your films are very typically well directed and everything like that, the mainstream media seems to always want to attack you. Why is that?
I think you can answer that question, Jesse. What would you say?
I'd, I'd say
It was my first.
I'd say that you go, Oliver, that you go to topics that they don't want discussed and you go to topics that they want to keep buried under the rug. But I have to ask those simple questions for the listeners out there. You know, they may not be quite as in touch as I am.
Well, I didn't provoke them deliberately. Frankly, I became interested in the subject matter off of Jim Garrison's book, Trail of the Assassins.
Sure.
And Jim, of course, was one of the first people who got publicly assassinated by the media. And now we know a lot more about how they assassinated him because we know he was a target of the CIA, very much a target.
Yep.
But Jim opened it up for me. I'm a man who believes in the truth. I don't have a political ideology, really. I just want to get this important subject. Why don't we do something about it? Why don't we investigate? No one is serious in the nature media. No one is really serious. You can't argue with them. They always publish what they want, and they interpret you the way they want. I had a big fight with Ben Bradley of the Washington Post and his people, and the New York Times, of course, crucified me a few times. It was very tough. I wasn't used to it. It was a new experience for me, and certainly scalded. I came out kind of wounded, and it's always been that way since that movie. Since that movie, I've had a hard time in terms of, I'm always being somehow judged in another capacity as a political filmmaker. The work is what matters to me. The work has been solid. I've maintained my excellence. I've maintained my standards all through these years. The last movie I did, Snowden, 2016, very well done, very well crafted, with a lot of research. But it was, it's hard to. They will never treat me the way they did when I did Platoon, because I was more of a hero then.
The world according to Jesse. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with more stories ignored by corporate media. Until then, always remember, when the government lies, the truth becomes a traitor. Wear those masks and stay vigilant. The world according to Jesse.